Yeah? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. You know, I was thinking about this yesterday. This class came to me in the middle of a Sunday sermon. I don't even think it was this year, but I'm not sure. It could have been. Because, you know, there's 2 weeks where Swamiji covers the Beatitudes in the weekly readings that we do. And he approaches them from different ways each week. But I think having been born and raised Jewish and never having been exposed to this until I came onto this path, which, you know, now is ancient history, really. I mean, I walked onto this path when I was in 1979. I had a little hiatus, but it's been a long time. But what I find, and maybe each of you finds this as well, and I'm feeling it particularly in these last few years, is that I read something or I study it or I take a seclusion or whatever happens that takes me deep, and I just get something in a way that I've never seen it before. Even though I could go back and listen to a talk about it or an experience I had about it, and it was good then. What I saw was good, and it was right. But there comes a depth of understanding and experience in the heart. It's very hard to put words to it, but it's much more a deep connection to the author. And in our case, the author is almost always some manifestation of the divine. In this case, of course, Jesus. But I remember when we had those 2 classes, I went soon after that to Lakshmi, who does our calendar, and said to her, I really need 3 hours on the Beatitudes. Because I might not even have mentioned them in Sunday service. It's never any fun to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's just not inspiring. So we may never have gone through them, but I felt a deep calling to do that. And my notes from that Sunday service that I made for myself have been sitting on my desk ever since. And when I looked at them yesterday, I thought, no, this isn't it. I knew that was not what this talk was supposed to be about today. What I've realized, as I think it came to me then, and it's come to me even more since, is that what Jesus did when he delivered this Sermon on the Mount, which was, of course, not just the Beatitudes, but the first 10 verses of that sermon are what we call the Beatitudes. You know, they speak to, the Beatitudes are, blessed are they who, for they shall receive, whatever it is. So, you live this way, here's the divine gift. They're really describing states of exaltation. They're true blessings. That's the origin of the word Beatitudes. It's where it comes from. And I think particularly after having been to Israel last year and sitting there where that sermon was delivered, it's just so powerful. Maybe that's was my own transformation. I hadn't thought of that, but
what town is that?
It's up near Tapga. It's up in the more northern part of Israel. And there's, you know, Israel's a very small country. And Jesus, although he traveled the whole country, of course, and then into Jordan too, which it wasn't Jordan then. So there was a lot of moving around. But so much of his path, I was going to say happens on the eastern side of the country, but it's not really true. Elijah and many of the prophets, we can follow their path up the west too. I think Israel, I hate to say this because it could be wrong, but it might be as big as like New Jersey or something. It's not big. If it's wrong, it's not wrong by much. So you can imagine the inspiration that you just feel everywhere. It's not just Jesus. I mean, long before Jesus, there was Abraham and Isaac and King Solomon and David. And I mean, it is the heart and soul of all of the major religions. It is the place to which all of these great souls were called. But when you travel through the country, which is, you know, in the center of the country are all the kibbutz, it's very green, it's very gorgeous, because the Jewish people really made it that way. It was a lot of dry, earth-caked, not quite desert the way Jordan is, but close. And it's just a remarkable story. Forgetting politics here, which we will, but the ingenuity of these people and the courage and the fortitude that it took to make Israel what it is today. It's truly a remarkable story to read, because this is all relevant, so this is not just a personal diary here, but last year I had an inspiration to go to Israel, and the inspiration came that Asha and I needed to go together. And she, I think, originally thought I was a little crazy when I said that. She said, well, I'll meditate on it, and I said, please do, but it came to me as an inspiration, so I'm sure we're going. In other words, it wasn't mine, and it's really the way it was. And honestly, it was about 6 weeks later that we went, if I have the dates right. And we spent a little over 2 weeks there together. Now, I can't even remember why I'm telling you that, but this is why, because it took me by surprise. I didn't prepare for the trip at all. I didn't read one work. The holidays were upon us when the inspiration came. I didn't know anything, nothing. I knew what you hear on the news, which we all know, you know. Only now do we have the term fake news, but it doesn't mean it's only happening right now. So I really knew nothing. And I just went and we put ourselves in the hands of Rami, our Orthodox Jewish guide, who also came through the internet, but as a clear, like, he's your man in my mind. And he was, and it was great. But it's funny, I keep losing this train of thought, but I keep wanting to go back to, I'm gonna have to let it go, but it'll come back to me. But when you're in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is still every bit the old stone that it was. It's hard, it's cold. I mean, we were there in January. It's in the low 50s, raining a lot, and it's known as an exceedingly windy city. So you don't feel it like it's 50. It's cold there. And it's difficult. We walked everywhere we went, and it's hilly, and it's those old steps, and just hard to describe. But when you think about the time, that feeling of Jerusalem, that stone, hard, cold, it describes it in a way. This is what Jesus came into. And remember, he came as a response to a call by the Jewish people. That's what happened. And they were, and most of you have heard me say this in Sunday services, they were a deeply God-loving people. But something was happening to them. Their rabbis were becoming their politicians, were becoming the people in charge of their money. They were not staying clean. They were losing their sight of the divine. And Jesus really came. He was a rabbi. He came as a Jew to say, in essence, he didn't say this out loud, I would like to help you move from being a God-fearing people now, which is what had happened because of the change in times. Remember, they had been in exile, they were in the desert coming through the desert for 40 days. They had been really persecuted by the Egyptians. So much had been going on. He said, I want to help you with this transformation from being God-fearing to God-loving. But he didn't say it out loud. He couldn't say it out loud because the consciousness of most of the people at the time was not a consciousness that could understand that fine of a vibration. And I'm going to come back to that. They would never have understood his words. Jesus, and this is why at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, it says he went up to the mountain and he called his disciples to him. Now, whether he actually only called 12 or 15 or 20, we'll never know. But basically it's saying to us, he wanted to speak to those people who he knew, in his own words, had ears to hear. This was a radical shift in consciousness that he was bringing. He was saying, in essence, what these Beatitudes say is what we hear all the time. I'm going to take you from this place of duality that you think you're living in to a unitive understanding of consciousness. Nobody was even using the word consciousness then. These were his core teachings. He took people, again without saying it, from the 10 Commandments, which were don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, 10 times, to very much, in a way, it's interesting. I was thinking of Patanjali a lot yesterday when I was reading these Beatitudes, the yamas and niyamas, because what they say is, if you live this way, the essence of who you are will be revealed. And blessed are they who do this, and they will find this. Here's the gift that you'll get. And the gift is a shift in consciousness all the time. You wouldn't know that if you didn't have that subtlety of perception. But that's what's happening. In a way, what Patanjali says is, if you, for instance, nonviolence, if you take that yama, which are the don'ts really, don't be violent, is really how he presents it, but it's not simply don't do it. He's saying if you can remove all traces of violence from your being, you will find that violence will cease to exist around you. It can't, because there's a shared energetic vibration that we're all living in. And within that energetic vibration, when we all do everything we need to do to come to the core of it, where will we be? Where will we be? We'll be one. We'll be literally resting in pure love. Patanjali says it over and over. And in essence, that's what these Beatitudes were saying here. He was saying, this is a radical shift. But remember, look at when this was happening. And this is where a lot of our teachings come into play. None of this is talked about in those times. But if we look at the yugas, and I think most of you have heard a fair amount about the yugas, this 24,000 year-long cycle of time that repeats itself. And there is, over here, ascending cycles. We all know this, but it's very important as the way to hold the Beatitudes and to understand them better. Here where you go through an ascending Kali Yuga period. Kali is a dark age, And it is literally the Dark Ages, what we just went through, and what was happening around the time of Jesus. Now, they were a little bit year-wise in the ascending part, but not far away from it. Look at what's happened since Jesus' time. When I heard Davy speak about this once, and she was talking about that period, she was talking about witches and witch hunts, you know, and I mean, I'll come back to that, witch hunts. I remember when I was in Italy, first time I ever went, and we went to the, where the gladiators fight, the Colosseum. And I just started feeling really ill. I could not imagine that people would ever go back there more than once. How many years later is this? And Kirtani, who was with us, said later to me when I told her I couldn't stand that place. I mean, here we are in Rome that is so gorgeous, and there's so much that's uplifting and expansive and beautiful, and people want to spend time in the Colosseum. She said so many people get very sick when they're on pilgrimage or pass out. You know, where for sport, this is what's happened since Jesus. For sport, people would just put people in this Colosseum and have animals eat them. These are pretty dark times. Davy was saying that how they used to tell, because you know, what they were calling witches in those days were very often women who had intuitive insight. They knew things that terrified the vast majority of people. And so how did they test them? I didn't know this, I've never read it, but I've heard Davy say it. To see if they were truly higher beings, they would burn them. And if they didn't burn, they would know they were true. I mean, that's what they said. If you don't burn, we'll know you're true. Now, interestingly, just to say this is a little off target, but fascinating. Elijah, part of what happened with Elijah, which you may remember from the Bible, is that he was in a debate, probably for his life, with some of the Roman teachers. And he was saying, if what you say is true, ask your God to bring fire down right now and to burn whatever it was. I don't remember. Again, it's just popping into my mind, so I don't have the details. And nothing happened. Then he took a sacrifice, whatever that was, I don't want to know what it was, put it on this stone and prayed for the fire to come, and fire came down and burned the sacrifice. So, I mean, of course, we all know, and we know this, that when you are, and this is Elijah, who some people say Christ was. I mean, it's, you know, so this was a very high being who, of course, could make fire appear. Of course. I mean, these are these great souls who can do anything. Anyway, I keep telling you all these wonderful stories, and I keep going and going. But everything will come back to me, and I know it. I just want to see if there was a point that I was trying to make about it. That was not the consciousness of most of the people. That's what I was talking about. It was a very, very dark time, and here comes this great avatar. Every time I say think about it, but it's not. When I remember inside of myself that it's 2019 years later, and so much of the world as we know it is still living according to what he taught. What does that tell us about who he was? Not that every great avatar does that, but he did. And here it is. It speaks to the essence of who that soul was on this earth. But we also have to hold the times. When we think about when Master came, particularly when he came here, he came to the United States in the early 1900s, And we are now in what's called ascending Dwapara. And we know all of this ascending age of energy. We're not very far into it, but we're into it. So it's much better. It's the age of energy. It's a time where all of the physicists can be speaking about matter and energy being the same thing. So, I mean, there are many more examples of that, but what it speaks to is that it's a time where Master could come and speak to us much, much more easily about Kriya Yoga, which is this technique using subtle energy, transformation by the use of subtle energy. Now, Jesus couldn't talk like that. He just couldn't. He was a very compassionate teacher. He didn't even try and impose these deeper truths on most people. When he did, he would speak in parables. And, you know, that's what he did a lot. And you had to really think about them. I still do, often, to think, what was the spiritual lesson here? You had to be able to perceive the truth in it, or you would never have figured it out. It would make no sense. You know, he says, and I'll talk about this later, some of these stories, but he meets a woman at the well. He says, don't drink that water, you're just gonna stay thirsty. But if you drink of the water that I will give you, you'll have a never-ending source of divine water. You would look at the man and think he's crazy. You know, as we hear about a lot, this is much more common, when he says, eat my body and drink my blood. You could imagine running screaming from the room. I mean, he just couldn't say these things too much out loud. And he cared enough about people to not do it. Really, Jesus came to teach unconditional love. That's who he was. And when I think of what it meant to have that as your message that you had to deliver, to say everything I am you are too, as in heaven, so on earth, dwell constantly in the consciousness of the divine to those people who were always doing battle. And it was kind of a pretty much what you see is what you get. Your life is always on the line and you have to be tough. And he came in to teach the same truth, Sanatana Dharma, because that's exactly what it means. The everlasting religion, the true religion, those truths, whether we're perceiving them or not, it doesn't change the truth. Whether we get it or not. 5 years ago, when I couldn't understand the Beatitudes, I keep saying understand, but I really don't mean with my mind. When I couldn't be moved by them as I was at that last Sunday service or yesterday, when that couldn't happen, it didn't change the meaning of the Beatitudes. Nothing changes because we don't get it. Gravity existed before people could define gravity. Energy and matter were always the same, even before Einstein could come back in Dwapara and say to people, you know what? I see it. Energy and matter are the same, and I'm going to prove it. Mathematically, I'm going to prove it. Why? So that the whole world could open to that knowledge, that truth, and get it. People didn't know that in thousands of years before him. People had no idea that was true, but it didn't make it any less true. And it's so remarkable to feel what his purpose was on earth and the subtlety with which he needed to deliver it. and the group that he could choose to deliver it to, which obviously was more than 12. It was more than 12. I mean, we know of many more than 12. We know of Mary and her mother and, Elizabeth and St. John. And I mean, we could go on. There were many more people, but not many, given all of the people around. He was speaking to very few people. And I never quite got, I still don't get, I was reading it again yesterday. I want to ask somebody this at some point. Why was it so appalling? I mean, this is weird after all I've studied with Judaism. Why did they hold him as a heretic? The only thing I could come up with is they must have felt in their minds that God was going to be so different than a human, and they couldn't make that jump from the human body, from Jesus Christ the man, to Christ consciousness. They couldn't imagine that what they were calling God, the Messiah, they're still waiting for the Messiah. How many avatars have been on earth? Over 2019 years. And it's tragic to me the Jews are still waiting. And they're serious about it. They're really serious. They're really looking all the time. And they don't see it, they can't get it. And it's sort of coming to me now as I'm speaking, that I'm sure this is it. If somebody was living in a human body, it couldn't be God as they perceived it. And they didn't have, again, the subtlety of perception. I was going to say they didn't have Master, but they did. They had Jesus trying to tell them. But for those who have ears to hear, as Master said over and over. So everyone in this room, can really get that the soul needs a vehicle. It needs a vehicle to even find its way back to God, but to appear on earth, even for the avatars. There's no way for it to be here and be seen and do its work other than in a human body. It can come to those souls who are highly evolved enough, wouldn't need to be in a body. When Swami Kriyananda sits down and meditates and has those meditations and goes into samadhi, he doesn't need to see somebody in a human body. But whatever the Leela is, which is not worth talking about, whatever all of it means, he too needed Master in his life where it looks that way. So it's just, and we needed him to be in a body. So here you are. I mean, the human body is a very, very important vehicle. It really matters when we talk about karma and reincarnation. But I don't think the Jewish people had faith because they weren't having those experiences. And I think, I just want to complete this and answer, that that's why they felt that he was called a heretic. That's why, and they felt him to be that. That's why they put him up on a cross and crucified him, which is really quite remarkable. The fear, the absolute utter fear that would drive people to need to do something like that. Now again, all of this matters so much to be able to deeply appreciate what he was doing and to remember how deeply loving he was, that really he came as a bearer of unconditional love. The third chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, as all of you know, it's called right action. It's really about right action, and it is so beautifully aligned with the Beatitudes, which are, excuse me, the Beatitudes are essentially about right action, because right action is what leads to pure consciousness. Right action is what leads to ultimate attunement. I mean, when you think of it, Sri Yukteswar, I just want to find this so that I can quote it, said that Dharma, he called Dharma mental virtue, which is, I think, different than how many of us hold it. We think of Dharma as, we would say it's right action. If we wanted to hold it that way, those are the words. He called it mental virtue, and he called it attunement with a higher truth that would lead to divine realization. It was a different way of speaking about Dharma, but because I'm trying to hold up the likenesses that Jesus and Master really came with the same exact message. This isn't a surprise to us. I don't think I'll say anything today that anybody's going to go, really? We already know this. We already know truth is one. We already know it's delivered at different times according to who needed to hear it. But there's such a joy in remembering that, in hearing it again, and in some ways, which when we get to actually discussing each of the Beatitudes, we'll do, to hear the different ways that it's presented, because what it will do for us as we sit here is it will open for each of us another way, not another thought, not anything more to know, but another way at a vibrational level to plug into the truth, to know the truth, to get closer to what the Beatitudes are trying to tell us, and what Master's trying to tell us, and where we're trying to go with Kriya Yoga. I mean, all of these tools that we've been given. So it's a joy to read each of these Beatitudes and say to ourselves, wait a minute, he's talking about Dharma. He's talking about right attitude. He doesn't call it that. Not only were the times different and the people different and the energy different, dictated by the yugas. It's not like people were being bad. In every age there are beings that have evolved more or less. When we think about Satya Yuga, it's not that every soul that exists in Satya Yuga is an avatar. It's not the way it is. There are issues and problems. I remember when Jyotish and Devi were giving a class. Let me just try and think if it was on the, I think it was on the Mahabharata, during an inner renewal week. They did the Mahabharata once, they did the Gita once, but they told this story about something. They think the Mahabharata was supposedly written during Treta Yuga, which is the Yuga just before Satya. So it's when you're doing the ascending, it's Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Satya Yuga. Satya Yuga fortunately lasts 12,000 years, so we get to be in it the longest. But anyway, these are these periods of time. I'm not going to go into it, nor could I do it justice, but I will tell you that the book on the yugas that Vyasa wrote, honestly, it reads like a novel. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, fascinating. And they relate everything in all of these yugas to things that were happening in time as we can relate to it. So it's wonderful. But the Mahabharata supposedly was written in descending Treta Yuga, so a high time. But supposedly in this story, somebody comes to I can't remember who one of the main characters was, one of them. and he says, how's everything going with my universe? And they said, very good. And they said, oh, except I'm trying to remember this from years ago, that's why I'm struggling with it a little bit. Years ago, in the farthest corner of not years ago, no, but in the farthest corner of your universe, in this tiniest of little villages, I did hear a fisherman, a little fishing village, and I heard a fisherman yelling at his wife, and whoever it was, this highly evolved soul, said, oh, that's the beginning of the end of this time. Even that little bit of a disturbance in the energy. It's just, when you think of these times, but there it was starting, it was Treta Yuga, but arguments were starting, and it just happens that way. It's not perfect in any yuga. There's just something that the great saints can see, we're going to be moving on now, because it would not exist at this level of consciousness. So, okay. So here we are. I was talking to you a little bit about Sanatana Dharma, which is, of course, the eternal religion, again, at the base of every great religion, which is what we're going to be talking about here. And it has to eventually surface again. It has to. I remember Swami Kriyananda saying once that if every single thing in this world, not really if, when, as we know it disappears, as we know it, whenever people inhabit Earth again, whenever that is, and we know it's happened before, right, on this Earth, they will discover these same exact truths, because truth just is. Whatever is. You can't change it for the knowing or not knowing or desire to see it, or our great desires to be in denial, which is how so many of us live a lot of our lives. We'd love to not have to see the truth. But those of us who are here, we've come through that time called Shankya, and we see, even repeatedly, we lost everything we had. We are now in this stage called the quest. We are. That's who we are, thank goodness. So that's what will happen again and again to people. We'll just come, and I would assume those of us in this room are not going to lose ground. When we're born again, if we are, I hope some of you don't have to come back. But when we come back, those of us who do, we will have whatever spiritual progress we've made. And when I was in Israel last year, and I would never say this out loud there because it would injure people, many of them. I so wanted to say to so many people, you don't have to be struggling and suffering like this. You really don't have to be. Just do what you know how to do best. Pray, go within. But anyway, we all come to whatever we come to in our time. So, let me just see where to go now before we go on to the actual Beatitudes. So, what I'm saying to you is, which I'm sure you get, this is why Jesus did it the way he did it then. The other thing I want to make clear, which Swamiji talks about many times about many things in many of his talks, is when language changes, which it does, this is why we would all have trouble reading the Bible and understanding it, or even reading the Gita. Language changes, literally the meaning of words can change. And it makes it very challenging to understand what Jesus meant. I was really fascinated yesterday. I picked up a book. I don't remember the woman's name now. I wish I did, who wrote this book, but the book is called The Wisdom Jesus. Somebody gave it to me as a gift years ago. And I've never really read it, but I've picked it up a couple of times. And I thought to myself, I bet she says something about the Beatitudes. And sure enough, she did. She's clearly a highly evolved soul herself. She's one of, well, let me not say anything more about her. She's a beautiful soul. I'll just say that. She's in this place a little bit, her audience is a little bit between mind and spirit. And her audience is also a totally Christian. She's a minister of a priest of some sorts. So her language is very different. But I just read, she didn't espouse on them very long, but it's so incredible that she totally understood each of these Beatitudes the way we're going to talk about them now, exactly the way Swamiji did when he speaks about it, when he expounds on them. You know, we've said many times what we read from every week is Rays of the One Light, and then there's Rays of the Same Light, in which he goes from 2 little paragraphs to 2 to 4 pages on the teaching. So he says more. And for the first 6 months of the year, he wrote The Promise of Immortality, where he really expounded on each of the readings, those particular teachings. But anyway, in Rays of the Same Light, because we're at the end of the year, he didn't finish that. He never did volume 2, so he never got to his full discourse on the Beatitudes this way. But in these short little sentences that he said, they understood them exactly the same way, which to me feels like, okay, that's the truth. That is, and I could feel it, but I knew that if I just read those Beatitudes, I would be struggling to think, what did he mean by mercy? What exactly did he mean by merciful? What does that mean spiritually? So I'm just saying it was fascinating to see when people who know the truth, really know the truth, come to these. They just see it there without hesitation, saying, don't you see this is what Jesus meant? And not just because the language changes, which we know and they both allude to, but their degree of perception is just that great. So let me just see if there's anything else I want to say before we move on here. Okay, so I'm going to, at the end, I forgot to bring a writing board in here, but I'll get one maybe at the break. I'm going to just list for you, and if we can't, I'll type them out and I'll send to each of you what I felt was the little 2 or 3 word takeaway. What was Jesus trying to say? You know, like with the first one, renounce ego. Okay, that doesn't say much, but hopefully after our discussion here, it'll make more sense when you look back. So, but mostly what he was saying is, if you're sincere, he was up on you know, I'm trying to remember the Sermon on the Mount. What was the mountain that it was on? Does anybody? No, it wasn't the Mount of Olives, no. That's in Jerusalem. No. He was up on this hill. I mean, again, I had the great privilege of being able to meditate there. And he was saying to all of these souls, dedicate yourself to uncompromisingly going to find God. You know, you have to be fierce about this. You have to be deeply committed. All the things that Master has said to us and Swamiji has said to us, you know, you have to be making progress on the spiritual path or you're losing ground. Swamiji said again many times, there's no standing still. And this really is what Jesus was trying to say. Because I want to just walk through the Beatitudes, I'm just going to tell you a cute story that happened to me at the chapel, the church, that's been erected. And by the way, as happens with everything in Israel, is destroyed and rebuilt depending on who comes in and who's in charge in the moment. But the current Church of the Beatitudes, which is gorgeous. But, we were traveling, we had already spent a week in Jerusalem, and we were with this man, Rami. And there's a lot of cats in Jerusalem. This just happened in Israel, all over Israel. A lot of cats. Like there's a lot of dogs in Mexico. You see 1 million dogs. And everybody gets very upset if you befriend the dogs, which I always did in Mexico. Rami said to me, whatever you do, don't touch the cats. I said, why not? He said, no, they could have disease, you don't know. Every day he would see me looking at the cat. Every day he would say, don't touch the cats. I mean, it got to be like a thing, a big thing, don't touch the cats. So there's this huge temple that's been erected, and the Beatitudes are carved into the rocks, and like all of those churches, I mean, it's done in gold and stones, and they're exquisite. But if you walk down this path, which I did, and it happened to have been raining, I found this. So it's overlooking the Sea of Galilee. So it's gorgeous. And I found this covered space. Nobody was in it. I mean, it could have sat 80 people, but nobody was there. And so I sat down and I start meditating. And it's easy to go deep there. I'll just say that. And all of a sudden, boing, this cat jumps on my lap. So I thought, oh boy, I better get, so I take the cat and I put it down. I start meditating again. He jumps back up. So we did this about 4 times. And he's looking up at me, sweetest thing in the world. I have a picture of him. I had several. Finally, I said to myself, Shanti, here you are, the Mount of Beatitudes. Jesus himself stood here. You had been in these deep meditations. This could be any one of those great saints coming back to bless you. Let the cat be. I meditated for an hour and a half, sitting there deeply. That cat never moved. Just sat on my lap the whole time in meditation with me. So, about a week ago, I'm in daily touch with Rami because we're planning this big pilgrimage that's coming up to go to Israel. And I was trying to remember, in that moment, I think it was Beatitudes, but where was it that I went and meditated? I want to reserve that space for us. Because when I was there meditating, somebody came up to me and like this hard tapping on my shoulder. It's a very unkind thing to do. Reality calls, we have this place reserved, you need to go. It's like, whoa, okay, let me just come back here. Anyway, I left. And so I said to Rami, I know you can reserve this place, because we did. And then I was looking through my pictures, and I found a picture of the chapel on my phone, and there's this walkway. So I sent it to Rami, and I said, look, do you see the walkway? This is at the Beatitudes, and you walk down that walkway. Because he said, I've tried to find the place you're talking about, I can't. I said, here it is. I didn't have a picture of the place. And then I said, but now it's time for confession. And I said, I want to tell you this story. And I wrote him this story, and I said, from the picture of the cat that I took. It's very funny. He said, it's funny now, but you're right. Because I said, I never told you, because you would have been so mad at me. Yeah. Very sacred and wonderful place, really. So why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll dive in with the real teachings. Well, these are all real teachings, but we'll come back to the actual Beatitudes. So what we'll do now is we'll just go through. Every once in a while I'm going to refer to some notes here, just to see if there's anything really fascinating that came to me yesterday that wants to come back. But we'll go through the Beatitudes now. So the first one is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall find the kingdom of heaven. So it's the poor in spirit, and the gift and the blessing, which is what we're looking for in all of these, is the kingdom of heaven. So what Jesus was meaning here by poor in spirit is not any of the ways, those are not words that we would use now. We wouldn't think of it as somebody who was behaving badly. We would. Somebody who was behaving badly, out of tune. I think that's how we would hold it. But what Jesus was talking about here, poor of spirit, means, and to him meant, an attitude of receptivity. And so again, this is the first beatitude. It says, for those who are open, for those who are willing and want to know God, you can then attain the kingdom of heaven. There's a story that I heard, which in a way, this woman, this author that I was telling you about, told a Zen story of a Zen teacher. There was a student who very much wanted to become this teacher's student, disciple. So the teacher called him over, and the student sat down and just started talking, started telling him all about himself and his past teachers and all of the lessons that he had learned. This is what he's sharing with the teacher. And so the teacher's just listening very calmly. Then he picks up a pot of tea, and there's a teacup, and he starts pouring himself a cup of tea. And he just keeps pouring it, and soon the cup's overflowing, and he still just keeps pouring, and he just keeps pouring. He's listening to the student, and finally the student notices, and he says, "Stop, it's overflowing." And the teacher says, "Yes, as are you. How can I give you anything?" And it's just, to me, I loved hearing that story. It so perfectly exemplifies what an openness and a willingness to learn really means. And you know, we know people like this. It really means get your ego out of the way and be receptive to whatever it is that's trying come in. Of course, what the promise is, when what's called heaven refers to the highest level of consciousness. It's not heaven as man thinks of heaven. Again, a difficulty that Jesus would have. And I think, you know, I feel certain now that what I said before is the truth. I feel that because the degree of the ability to perceive subtle energy was so not present then, that people would think of heaven and they would think of, and people still do, I mean, most people, an exaggeratedly beautiful earth as we know it. It's like the colors are more vibrant, the sounds are more pleasing. And I think, again, we're used to hearing it differently. But for a lot of Christians, it is really very much the truth. So, you know, Swamiji is saying to us that he's talking more about what it means to be in God. So if you can be, accept in a way, accept and let flow, like to be able to be in a flow with God's energy. Swami uses the words, accept man's nothingness and God's everythingness. And we all know he doesn't mean this in a disparaging kind of way to who we are. I mean, nowhere in any of these teachings, anytime Swamiji talks about it, he speaks about the power of Jesus. We know because one of the readings that we've all heard so many times in church about Jesus meek and mild, where Swamiji keeps saying, Jesus was by no means meek, though people would have presented him that way. He says, remember, he's the same man who threw the money changers out of the church, and he lists other things that Jesus did. But Swamiji too, he's not talking about this when he said the acceptance of man's nothingness and God's everythingness. He's talking about that what it takes to begin to let go of our egos, our desires, our needs, our sense that we know everything. Because just like that student, then there's no way to give anything. That this poverty of spirit is not a loss. It's kind of a glorious lack.
It's like moving away the mud.
It's like moving away the mud. That's very well said. Thank you, Larry. That's exactly right. He said moving away the mud.
From the gold. Discovering the gold.
So it's not passive. It's an active emptying of oneself, if you will, to allow God to come in and teach, enter and take charge of our lives, as we say all of the time. It means, in essence, this first one means if you can be without ego, again, very much like the yamas and niyamas, they're goals. We all have to attain them to go where we all want to go. But it doesn't mean we can just get there. And we don't get there, as we say very often, by saying, okay, I'm going to just let go of my ego. But we get there by redirecting every thought, every action, as much as we can, as many times in the day as we can, back to God. Because ultimately, just by doing that, that is the seek ye first the kingdom of God. We know this. We can never solve all of the problems here. So we have to hold these Beatitudes as the goal. They're the goal. They're not necessarily the way. Jesus is saying, if you can be poor in spirit, if you can be egoless, if you can be really utterly receptive to God's will, then you'll attain the kingdom of heaven, or you'll attain really what we would call God realization. He was not speaking about a weakness. And I think this is important because, again, the way language changes, and I feel this through all of the Beatitudes, just the fact that he used the words poor in spirit, we could think of it as a weakness, and we don't want to. Swamiji says, quite contrary to that, Swamiji's words are, it takes heroic determination for anyone to even think about going down this path, to lead oneself to where one would be poor in spirit. Remember the saying of St. John of the Cross, something else that came to mind when I was reading yesterday that I put down, where he said, if you would seek to arrive at being everything, in order to arrive at being everything, desire to be nothing. In order to arrive at knowing everything, desire to know nothing. In essence, St. John, of course, who lived at the same time, close enough, was saying the same thing. Don't let this be about you. You cannot find your own way into the kingdom of heaven. We cannot, by our own efforts, find our way to God. But if we move towards humility, if we really, it's like what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the Thanksgiving Day service. When the thought came to me, I'm so proud of these people. And I had to really go back and rethink that, because, do you remember, Swamiji tells a story where he was walking around the village one day, and he was looking, it was night, and he was seeing all of these tents and cabins and trailers, and all the lights were on, and he knew everybody was in there meditating. And he said to himself, I did this. And then in an instant, he said, he knew. He said what happened was it felt terrible. He said, and it came to him, and I don't remember how he put it, but I'll put it how I would say it, that what came to me on Thanksgiving. If I was going to be proud of those 6 or 8 people up there, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's been a huge part of the role that I've been given here in Ananda in these 20 years, is to help mentor and train a lot of people. That is one of the ways that Master has chosen to work through me. And it's obvious. It's not like anybody would question that or doubt that. People all around the world are looking at our group of next wave people and saying there's a model here. And they really were extraordinary on Thanksgiving Day. The mistake is, look what I did, and not the immediate feeling of, wow, Master has done such beautiful work, and really know that and mean that. Now, just to say, I did get back to it in about 30 seconds, but the truth is, that first thought was, wow, I'm so proud of them. And it's, it's a trap. It's really a trap. And it holds up for me how many times, even in the course of a day, ego gets in the way, which is the exact opposite of poor in spirit, that is really rising above that egocentricity is really what the lesson is there. Jesus himself said, Jesus' consciousness was centered not in humanity, but in the infinite consciousness of God, and this is what he was trying to say to everybody. And those were his words. He gave it to them as a one-liner. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Anybody have any?
I had a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, what I was just thinking when you were talking about the ego, it's a process. It is that, part of it is that process of awareness as we see it come in and we try to move away from that part of ourselves as much as possible. And then when you were saying it's not through our efforts that we get to God or the divine, but it's if we sincerely put the right effort in, that helps to draw the grace, which helps us
Absolutely.
To go there.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think those, absolutely. And I think, Larry, you're being picked up by the mic here, but that we have to, the only way God can help us is if we are willing, if we bring all of our willingness, great energy, all of our power to him, to that consciousness. It's like, that's the invitation and the way in. That's why I think when Swamiji said, and we've all heard this so many times, but the spiritual path is 25% our effort, 25% the effort of the guru, and 50% the grace of God. But our 25% has to be 100%. It is one of the things, what you're speaking to, Larry, that I have come to take very seriously in my life. I wish I had known this earlier in life, but I just didn't. And that is, every second counts. Every second. Right now. Every second, every thought, every decision, everything counts about which way are we turning. If we turn towards the light from the simplest things, if we do that, if we can remember to do that, be raising our energy up, then the light enters us and we have access to it. It touches our heart. This is what we call the grace of God. But every time, and I just think about it for myself, I'm not going to point a finger at anybody else, the little trickles of critical thinking that go by, or the I-ness. It's amazing how easy it is for that to come in. We're so used to it, we don't even notice it. I just grabbed this little it was a mini seclusion, it was 5 days. Not really a very long time, but I said to myself, morning one, you have 5 days, dive deep now. And it turned out to be just really a wonderful and deep 5 days. But I watched how over even the course of that first day and then day 2, how a lot of that starts to dissipate when there's no thwarting cross currents of ego being stimulated. You're not out in the world. You're sitting there, it's you and your altar and beautiful books and Swamiji's teachings and Master's voice, and This beautiful book about Jesus. I mean, whatever it is, when we hold ourselves to that, we can have an experience of these, and then from the experience, we have a point of reference to keep coming back to. And it's very important. And I know this is why Master said, seclusion is the price of greatness. He actually said those words. What does that mean? And each time I'm in seclusion, I have an experience that says something happens when you make this happen. And let's face it, it's not easy in any of our lives. It was not easy to take 5 days the first week in December when you're the spiritual director of a spiritual community and the holidays are coming. I'm sure there were a lot of people who are not pleased with me, and there's stuff going on about the community and just everything. There's a lot happening. When you naked those words, when you're ferocious about it, when you're like a tiger going after its dinner, for what you want on the spiritual path, and you make this happen, something happens every time that's wonderful for the soul that could not have happened otherwise. It couldn't have. And I know that now. I mean, I've known it. But I just, even in 5 days sitting in Mountain View, I stayed home. But I was 95% unplugged. Every once in a while, a thought would come to me, wow, this has to happen this week, and I forgot to deal with it before I left. I have to write Tandava, and I would say, don't write me back, and away messages on the emails and stuff like that. But 95% unplugged. And of course, there's times where I've done it, and it's good for all of us, let me say that, 100% unplugged. To take yourself up to the meditation retreat. It's really pretty amazing how well everyone in the world gets on without us when they need to. We are all dispensable. And it's a hard thing to know that. And particularly if you do it at a place like the meditation retreat, which is so beautiful, and if you have a family or things are going on, you say, if there's an emergency, call me. So that you know. And usually it's not so much about how much we're needed, it's about how much we need to be needed or the stimulation. And it's amazing putting that down for a while. And the first couple of days can be hell, because we're not used to being that quiet. One time I was doing a month of seclusion, and I was up at Sea Ranch, no Wi-Fi, I was unplugged, no phone, really. And I started telling myself for the first 3 or 4 days why it was wrong for me to be away from the community. How much, they really need me down there right now. This was years ago, I can't even remember now how many. No, I really need to leave her. This is selfish of me being in seclusion. Until you go over that hump and you can really be with that silence, be with that poor of spirit, be with every one of these. The second one, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And again, remember, mourn means very different things now. The thought that came to me when I read this was the line in the festival that says, in wordless yearning. And I thought, mourning here means yearning. It means not just letting ourselves be vulnerable, but entering into a state of such deep need. It's more of a state of need than it is of getting into the flow of divine consciousness again, away from human consciousness, and to know that we desperately need something, like we've lost something that we absolutely, or we feel like we've lost something that we know we need. And it's true. And that's what the mourning is. that deep connection with the divine. And we do have to yearn for it. That's what happens. I forget the saying now of the saint who says something about, I think it's St. Anthony, who said something about our heart, but you've planted that need for you in our hearts, and our hearts won't rest until we find it. He said it much more beautifully, of course. But it's really true. I mean, that's what came to me here, is that it's actually a pain of something that we're missing. This is what Jesus is saying. When you want God that badly, when you let yourself remember how alone you are, and how lonely, and how much in need of his love, then you will be comforted. When you get into that much pain, that the only way that you can be saved, if you will, but really it's like that, from the pain, is when you remember, not with your mind, but your heart remembers, there is something bigger holding us together here. There is something bigger, and it is that something bigger that will comfort me. And you know, I just want to stop and say, just doing what I do here, I do spiritual counseling for a lot of people. I mean, every week, a lot of people, I get to talk to them. And so many times, people who have been on this path, much less long, even in this life, than I have, will call me. They come to me in such pain about something, or something hurts them, or somebody hurts them, or they get terrified, whatever their words are. And there's no way to just fix that. You love them, and you can be a little reassuring, but not, you can't say to somebody in great pain, listen, in 2 or 3 or 5 days, it's not gonna hurt, or in 4 years. What good is that? Even if you know it, it's very hard, impossible, to take somebody's pain away or all of their fear away, because it's not ours to do. It's in that very morning that God can come to them. So what I can say is, I know this is hard, but if you're there with it, if you go home, if you meditate, if you pray for guidance, for friendship, for counsel, God will come. And I cannot tell you how often those people come back to me, even relatively new on the path, and they said, it just worked. They don't say these words, but they felt comforted. Nothing changed. The situation didn't change. Their hearts changed. Their consciousness changed. Does that make sense? You know, and it's exactly what it is, that you're longing for. You won't be comforted truly, because human comforts, they come and go. That's what happens. In a moment, we're hurt. We're hurt either just because somebody betrays us, they mistreat us, they die on us. I mean, things happen. We get hurt because, and I feel so deeply for the Jewish people, you know, and it's deeper now than it ever was. When I think of how many times they have suffered, how many times, just about everywhere in the world, pogroms and all of what they've been through, you can get it. You know, human comfort doesn't do it, but divine comfort does do it. And that is what we're really looking for. And when we know that when we go to God, you can know this. It's been a promise. What did Babaji say to us? Babaji said, anybody who speaks my name with deep sincerity, I forget exactly the word he used, but like that, will be granted a blessing. He doesn't say what it is. Sometimes our prayers are answered in ways other than how we wanted it, but he says that. And Swamiji told us over and over, you ask God for something earnestly, Ask for it, and your prayer will be answered in its time. It doesn't mean that we get to know when it is. I know at least several of you have heard this story, so I just tell a short version of it. But I was really, really spiritually lost in a moment in my life. It was right around the year 2000, right before I moved into the community. I didn't lose my faith in God, but I didn't know what to do with it. And the whole story is that I found myself in a very, very long period of being alone. It was almost a full year of being completely by myself. And in this moment, I was sitting in a friend's house. She was in Brazil. And I did a 6-week period of silence there. She's a Buddhist. She had a tatami room. And I said to God at one point, I'm not leaving until you speak to me. I'm not leaving this spot. I have no food here, no water here. I will die here if I need to. Speak to me. And it's that kind of prayer. I often say to myself, Shanti, why are you still telling that story? Have you not prayed that fervently since then? But you know what? I'm not certain that I have. I sat there for 12 hours. 12 hours, you know? And then I got an answer. It's just when we pray that hard, and I'm not saying it will always come in the moment, but it did, and it makes for a very good story of truth. So that's what mourning here means. And that's what comfort means, because when you get the answers so clearly, so directly, when you absolutely know that God has spoken to you, really, there's nothing else in the world that you want. Your heart knows that God just appeared. You know the truth. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't doubt God's existence, his presence, and even though I can tell you, that was almost 19 years ago now. That was 19 years ago. And have I not felt frightened or jealous or judgmental or whatever those things are that probably most of us feel since then? Yes, of course I have. That didn't take it away. But it gave me a point of reference that I can always go back to, that I can remember from. Every little bit of spiritual progress we make becomes part of the path that we are traversing, that we leave behind. Every bit of it. And every experience like that, even if we can't hold on to the moment of it, the true, sheer, but true joy of the moment of it, because it's God's presence that we're experiencing right then. And even if we can't walk around the world doing it, we know it now. And then we know it again the next time, and again the next time. And that's how we grow spiritually. Until we have no doubt, even when we're not living it, we have no doubt about it. It's there for us. Always. So that wordless yearning, every time I'm up there and I read those words or I hear them every Sunday, touches me so deeply. I feel it in my heart. And this is an experience of the heart. It's all an experience of the heart. I'll probably say it 6 more times with the next 6 Beatitudes, because that's how we find God.
I have a couple thoughts. One is, when we have those experiences, when I've had those experiences where I know that, God or Master, whatever, has come to me.
Yeah.
I know he's come to me much more than what I'm conscious of, but there are certain times when it's clear. And so it's just so important and great to hold on to that and to remember that, because that's faith, that's our experience. And it's just, at those times when I'm not so in touch with it, it's just very, very helpful to keep me,
yes,
going straight forward. And then also, You mentioned, or I think Swami said, it's heroic basically to be on the path or to try to get rid of the ego. And the thought that came to me is, especially, for instance, in meditation, when we get to a point where that ego is not so present and we're more in touch with, the true reality, and that's just so beyond fulfilling. And then, by contrast, those times when we know that we're out of tune, and that's so incredibly painful, it's not really so heroic. It's more like, who wants to be in history,
Yeah. It's really right what you're saying, but it's all right. Yeah.
And then the one other thing that I thought is, you talked about you had that short seclusion, but you wanted to make the most of it. And beforehand, you set your intention and you made a commitment. And that, I think, my belief is that probably helped you to go deep. Because even if I sit to meditate in the morning and I really try to say, okay, this morning I only have an hour or whatever, and I really set my intention, my commitment, and push everything else aside and know I'm going to be concentrated, it can be deeper than a much longer meditation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Larry, for those comments. Let me just say, make no mistake about it. I mean, everything that Larry is speaking to is that exactly where this started an hour and a half ago. We are blessed to be on a path that is dealing with subtle energies. When we say yes, when we say I will, when we say now is the moment, when we say with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength, when we say you come to me now, whenever we do any of that, we are shifting those subtle energies. And there's a reason why setting an intention, it's great to highlight it, and I'm very glad you said it the way you did. But the reason is, and the reason why I had to say Monday morning, okay, no time to waste here. These 5 days, I need to get in touch with, be in the consciousness of, expand my heart in a way that will carry me, I was saying, certainly closer to God, but also through this next month, which I knew what was coming in the next month. I planned that seclusion months ago so that I could be the best I could be throughout the rest of this month. But going into it saying that completely rearranges our astral spine. So it's so important to make those demands. You come to me now. There's a woman, this story has just come back to me, and I think I've repeated it several times recently, maybe in LA or here, who when she comes up for purification on Sundays, she comes up and says, I seek purification by the grace of God here, now. That's what she says. Most of us come up and say, I seek purification by the grace of God here, now, every week. And I remember how I felt about that the first time or two I heard it, but it was only a time or two. And then I said to myself, in spiritual terms, you go, girl. I feel like, yes. I mean, she means it. She brings that. And that really matters. That's part of the second beatitude, is, that's what being mournful really means. You see, the beauty of all of this, I'm going to remind you again, just so we don't lose it. Christ was saying everything that Master said. He just had to say it in his own words at that time. But isn't it remarkable? Everything is just so in tune with who we are and where we are. Does anybody else have a comment or a question?
I was just thinking back to the school that I helped start 40 years ago, and being the director, and how that shifted over time, and how hard that is to let go of that control of that image of being the director, because other people I've helped mentor and they're leaders now, which is wonderful, but there's a part of me that wants to be the director.
Yeah.
But it's so nice to get away from that and see, well, You know, a true leader is someone who helps create that space where the other leaders can rise and support the community so it can take on its own life more.
Yeah.
And you articulated that so well for me when you were visiting.
I'd like to articulate one other part of that, Virendra, that I know you'll get, and it's so meaningful. I'm in a similar place in my life. I have been for a few years. You know, I was given a lot to do here at Ananda, Palo Alto. The masters themselves actually came to me one day and told me, what we're about to ask of you is a lot. They said to me, if you forget who's actually doing it, when you get anxious and forget who's doing it, find the nearest altar. This was some years ago. This isn't what I wanted to tell you. It took me 2 years to remember that the altar meant my heart, but that's besides the point. But I've been very clear, now, and I'm a lot older than you, but still, spiritually, I may not be any older than you, but it's been very clear to me for about 2 or 3 years that my role needs to change. It just hasn't been the time, but it has been changing. I mean, you know, I can say it in worldly terms. 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I was doing the calendar. Now Lakshmi is. 1 year ago, I was taking charge of who remembered every event that was coming up and making sure all the pieces were covered. Now Tanva does that. You know, 10 years ago, I was handling all of the grounds work that was being done here. Now, Navashan, I could go on and on. A lot of it's been handed off. But the most important thing that I'm feeling now that I'll share for whoever it's useful for is all of that served me spiritually. We're not talking about the director or the school or the church. We're talking about our soul's long journey through time and space. It all served me spiritually when it was mine. And it doesn't serve us when it's not mine, though the ego has a little trouble letting go. But if we struggle with the ego, yikes. Forgive me. Meek, right? No, it wasn't meek. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what the first, the first one. Poor in spirit. Yeah. When we're struggling with the ego, when we're on that first beatitude, the ego that wants us to keep being the director. The soul doesn't. It says, I've learned every lesson I'm going to learn there. And I grew, and it was beautiful. Where can I grow now? What is meant to be happening now? And it is hard because Maya is so strong. It just is. Even when we see it and we know it and we're out there doing battle, still, it is strong. You know, you remember in the Gita, the ego doesn't die. It can be riddled with arrows, and it will not die till it decides to die. So we have to say to ourselves, where am I going spiritually? How can I grow now spiritually? And it's been very helpful for me. I do not belong running this church in the same way I was. It's not even about me. There's sort of no I there. Master and Swamiji put me there for a while. It was beautiful. Boy, I tell people often, God, I've just seen you grow so much in the last 5 years, and some people feel insulted, and I have to say to them, do you want me to tell you all the ways that I could tell you that I've grown spiritually in the last 2 years, 1 year? It's what we're doing here. Let's celebrate that. But it's not meant for me anymore. My soul's going to stagnate. I have a lot more growing to do before this soul leaves this body. So I hope that's helpful. Because I do know exactly what you're talking about. Believe me, I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. The third beatitude is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So we would know by now, even from reviewing these first to, meek here does not mean weak. That's not at all what it means. Meek means, in essence, gentle, really. It means harmonious. It means taming the instincts, the animal-like instincts that are in us, because that's what that's what the ego is. That's what the ego is dealing with. And even before there was an ego, before this human incarnation, all of those instincts that we come in with that are animalistic, that will fight for food, or where did I hear Davy telling us? Well, it's not even important. The story will take too long to tell. It's a good story, but it'll take too long. But those ways that we can find ourselves pushing, it's like the animal in us. And here we are, we need to tame those instincts. That's what he means more. We need to become more gentle. We need to become more harmonious with nature and with the divine. And he even says, inherit the earth. I mean, he makes it feel much more about nature. But remember, when we think like this, God is everything. It's not like nature is outside of the divine pursuit. And he even uses, and this is something I read, this is something I wouldn't have known, but I love this. He says, for they shall inherit the earth. And that woman who I was telling you about, again, just a couple of lines on each one, but she said here, let me just see that what he's talking about here is to inherit the earth, not to destroy it. And by that, I know she meant, now she didn't say this, we could take that literally, inherit it and not destroy it, because boy, have we done a good job of destroying the earth. But when you think of it, what's driven all of that? We were not living in tune with this manifestation of the divine when we created plastics and decided to dump them in the ocean. I mean, we could talk about a million ways that we're destroying the earth. All of it has been about the ego making progress, moving through all of these times where we wanted to produce more and better and faster. I'm hesitating because there's a story right over here that no, it's not going to come in. That's okay. Again, perfect example of that. But that's what mankind has done. And it doesn't take much to look around. So even if wow. How's this going, Lakshmi? Can you tell?
Yeah, I think it's still fine.
Okay, and can you see if I'm recording? Okay, because it popped open just as I was speaking about advances. That was very strange. Anyway, so we could say inherit and not destroy just at that level, but I think there's a deeper level too, where we are truly inheriting all of God's energy through the earth and in all ways, where we're putting ourselves in harmony with the vibration that is the divine. Again, whether it's manifesting as a river that we don't want to pollute or as a feeling of love in our heart, doesn't really make much difference. We have to learn to be less aggressive in the world, if you will. I think that's a very good word, to be able to inherit it. Davy said a beautiful thing to me one time, years ago now, and it came to me last night when I read that line that the woman said, inherit and not destroy. They have one son who's 5 years old, who's probably now 40 years old, at least, maybe older, I think. But when he was 5 years old, he approached them and he told them in no uncertain terms, this is your path, it's not mine. And he proceeded to be, he acted out. He was not being harmonious with much of anything for many, many years after that. He seems to, I've never met Mark, but they speak of him like he's just a lovely guy, and they're very close with him now. He lives in Nevada City, he has several children. But she said to me one time, now this was years ago, as the relationship has, grown and changed and transformed like all relationships do. But Davy said to me, I've always known that I was holding his spiritual inheritance in my heart. Isn't that beautiful? Somehow when I read this, it came to me because that is so harmonious with what is. Instead of, how could this be? The spiritual directors of Ananda worldwide have a son who wants nothing to do with the path and never did and acted out about it. It's extraordinary when you think of it. What a lesson for all of us, But she said, I'm holding that spiritual inheritance with all of the love of the Divine Mother. I mean, it just exemplified this teaching here. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. The other thing that just came to mind is how we receive. The more that we give, the more love that we give to the earth and to the people in it and to everything here, the more that we can love, the more it comes back. And we get back just in the way that we give.
I read once an interpretation of that was sort of like your earthly needs will all be met. You're inheriting the earth, you'll have a harmonious life when everything will,
it's beautiful.
Good will come to you because you're meek and not kind, you're open.
Beautiful, yeah. And I think, when Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all else shall be added unto you, he meant that. He means it here too, but yeah, I mean, we're all just turned inside out. As I often say, the only problem is we're headed 180 degrees in the wrong direction much of the time. I have to say those of us here are doing a little better than that, so I don't want it to sound so gloom, but everybody thinks they have to get secure out there first. And I remember when it really hit me, when I was getting ready to leave Baltimore in 2000 and move back here, and I took a year by myself, and a lot of it in silence. That was the year. And I remember, this feels like that concept in psychology where they say, that they're talking about reversing the foreground and the background in a sense of turning ourselves inside out and seeing what we were waiting to do and bringing it forward. I mean, there's a lot to it. I don't want to even misstate it. But it came to me as I got in my car and started that year-long journey that landed me in the community. This is what it means. I really am changing the foreground and the background, because until then, I meditated. I was already a Kriya Bond. I was very much on a spiritual path, but I fitted in around my life. And suddenly, when I got in that car and started heading west, it was my life. It's just that turning around, changing the shadow and the light. It's just an amazing time. So anyway, okay. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. I mean, I don't know how I would have interpreted all of this, because even the word righteousness is so different. Jesus meant it in such a different way. But when you hear that hunger and thirst, it takes on the same quality that we talked about with mourning. That it's so much deeper than what we think, though it's about a spiritual thirst, a spiritual yearning. You know, it's again that we're living in an environment that is made manifest from divine energy, that we're in this, it's charged with energy is really the only word, and that we're directly connected to it, and we're yearning to connect those wires again. That's my word. It's probably not the best word, but to make the best and deepest connection that we can. And I think this speaks so directly to the intensity both of the connectedness and of the need of our desire to be reconnected. That once again, Jesus is implying by saying hunger and thirst, he's saying you have to be one-pointed, you have to be strong. Again, you have to be fierce in your effort here. And here's another thing that came to me, that is, when we're hungry for something, we already know it. Otherwise, we couldn't be hungry for it. You know, you don't say, like, in the most simple way, oh God, I'd really love to have a piece of pumpkin pie. If you didn't already know that and know that you loved it, you wouldn't hunger for time with a friend if you didn't already know it. So he's asking us to be reconnected, to remember. Smriti is what he's referring to here, to something that we already know, or we couldn't be hungry. He's saying, you know it, hunger and thirst for it. Am I saying this well enough? It's something that we already know about. The bond to it is already in place. And more than anything, I thought here about what it means to allow the memory in a heartfelt way, in the core of our spine way, of who we are, guide us back to that which we already know. Because it is in that heart's knowing, that core of our spine, right up through that, this Sushumna, really, that aligns us with the truth of who we are. And that's really what righteousness is. Righteousness is, again, like everything here, like the blessing of everything that he's talking about, meaning attunement to the divine. The blessing always winds up meaning that. No matter what word he's saying, you do this, you'll find God. You do that, you'll find God. You do number 4, you'll find righteousness. But what does righteousness mean? It doesn't mean something more. It's not a moral code. That's not what he meant. It's not even how Jesus lived. It's how the Jews were trying to live. Interestingly, the Jews had 680 some laws, is it, or something like that, that they were supposed to live by every day. You know, no wonder they had to sit and study them all the time. I mean, really, who could remember all of those laws? They had a lot of moral codes and do's and don'ts. That's not what these teachings are about. These teachings are about something so much higher. These teachings are about attunement with the divine and that which is right in the eyes of God. That's what Jesus is referring to here. It's not anything the mind can know. It's a vibration. And that's what we're talking about. You bring your vibration back in tune with God, and you will attain that state. Is really what he's saying. Yes, Miranda.
I was just trying to understand the distinction between faith and attunement.
You know, faith, as Larry was talking about, in something. And I'm not sure, let me say this. You can have faith in something and not yet be completely attuned to it, but I'm not sure. I think the distinction is so fine that I'm not sure it behooves us, because let me just think about, because I was thinking about faith and samadhi, really, is what I was thinking, though I wasn't calling it that. No, I think attunement and faith, pure attunement, not the act of attuning. When one is completely attuned, one then has that faith. I think they are, in essence, they're one and the same, though as in English language, we would use them differently. But what Larry said, and what we know to be true, until we've had an experience of something, and in this case, we're talking about those experiences that come with complete attunement, we can only believe in it. And this is why Master always said, it's a science, prove it, don't believe me. He said over and over, don't believe me about meditation. Don't believe me when I say the only way to get to any of this is through meditation. Make it an experiment and prove it, because we might believe him for various reasons, but once we've had the experience, then we can say, I have faith in that. I know that to be true. And I feel like a lot of the blessings that come to many of us come in that form where we are given an experience, sometimes very early on in this life. I mean, I could think of 4 of them, 10 of them, that were handed to me before I had any conscious awareness of what I was doing, what I was looking for, what I was seeking. But obviously it had to do with past good karma. Again, we don't lose that, so we come in. And from those moments on, we have those experiences in this life, we have faith. We may not know what it is that we're looking for. We may not know where we're going. I was a tiny little girl when some of those happened. But that's why I say like what I just said a couple Sundays ago, I've always believed in reincarnation. In this life, well, of course I have. Of course, because I've moved spiritually enough in past lives. And I've been shown things. From the time I was little, I had that experience that you've all heard me talk about, I won't share it again, when the man died in the ICU and I'm watching him up in the corner of the room. So many things. What am I going to do, not believe in reincarnation? These things happened when I was young. I had an experience with my father, my father died when I was 14, who came to me. I had that experience when my sister was dying. We have these experiences that are not of the human condition. And then we have faith. But I can't say that I'm fully attuned to the divine. Does that make sense? I'm speaking around it because I think it's the only way.
I was just going to ask again about righteousness, because that word is often in the New Testament, the Old Testament, the 23rd Psalm, leads to the path of righteousness, and it's always been unclear to me what righteousness. I assume it means many things, but it is a word used a lot in the Bible.
I think it means many things to many people. We use it a lot. I didn't say all this, but I wrote these notes down when I was thinking about it last night. That righteousness can simply be a virtue. He felt righteous in doing that. There's so many ways to define the word. What we're trying to look at here is, what did Jesus mean by it? First of all, what did it mean then? And I don't know all the ways it's used by whom, it's what I mean in the Bible, because, in the Old Testament, I can imagine people used it in a different way. And I can imagine, the Jews were so scholarly. Look, even now, let me just stop and say this. You all know we've been in this Leela, this divine Leela about our community. And we're in this play with all of our dear friends, our brothers and sisters on this path. They're so much more than friends. They're people that we trust more than we trust anybody in the world. We come to a certain point around a certain issue. I said this, it's like if you stood in the middle of a circle that was made up of all of these people. each of them are standing just a degree off. They're looking at the center and they see it differently. Do you see? So as humans, what we mean by righteous, what we mean by dharma, it's, we can't know the truth until we know the truth. And knowing the truth is not part of the human condition. It's a divine quality. So as long as our mind is engaged, I'm trying to say something very important now, I know that, or meaningful. So if I'm not saying it well, tell me. If human beings are using the word righteous, they're using it in one way. If Jesus is using it, he's meaning it in another way. If Swamiji says it or Master says it, we are trying to rise to the meaning of righteousness as they mean it, not as people say it when they get righteously indignant, or many of my dearest friends, the people I love and respect and need in the world, who are all sure right now they know what Dharma is. And Dharma is very hard to know. Bhishma says it in the Mahabharata. Dharma is hard, he says. It is hard to know Dharma. I'm saying it because it would make one quizzical if one's trying to understand it with the mind. Of course it would, because, and I said this at service 6 months ago or so. I remember it came to me and I said it, but I've said it many times since then. Until we are completely evolved, we cannot consistently know truth. We are not free until we're free. We're always subject to the pull of Maya and delusion. We are. And so that's why it can be confusing and complicated. But I'm going to trust these interpretations of the word righteousness that Swamiji has made. Does anybody know what that is?
It's choir practice.
Oh, choir practice, I see. They must be right. Okay. All right. Anyway, so yeah, it's a complicated word, but I will tell you that it doesn't just simply mean virtuous. It doesn't mean well-behaved. It doesn't mean that one thinks they're morally superior, which is how we've used that word. It means perfect attunement with the divine. I hope that helps. I mean, that's the only way. I always laugh when we're sitting here using our minds, trying to transcend the mind. It's complicated, that's what teaching and sharing is, and it's very complicated. Okay, number 5. Blessed are they who are merciful, for they will receive mercy. This one really interested me, but what Jesus is talking about here is an exchange of energy. He's really talking, and we can understand it better, again, because we're living in an age of energy, that what we put out will come back. Seeing that energy and matter are all the same, and that God is everything, so that if we do harm anywhere by thought or action or anything, it will come back to us. But the more we are empathic, loving, generous, seeing the divine in everything, then we'll receive that back. God, loving God, that God is everything, that that this exchange is at this merciful means an exchange of energy that's at the heart of everything. It means no separation. It means of the heart, truly, the spiritual heart. God is love. Those words that are so hard to understand until, again, the first time you have an experience of divine love. And when the experience comes, you understand you are in the presence of the divine. You don't try and figure it out. You are, as I keep saying, because I have no better way of saying it, in love. You're in love. You are love and you're in love. And it's all one and the same, no separation. And that really is what Jesus was talking about, merciful. It wasn't, he's not giving us something, he's not saying, I'll give you this because you're weak, because you're needy, which is how we think of it. Oh, be merciful with him, give him a break, is often how we think of it. No, what Jesus is saying, you get to that place of knowing God is everything. You are one with all that is, and you cannot know that with your mind. Jesus didn't say that. He did, but in 2 words. I'm saying it in many more words. You can only know this in the heart. And once you know it, you have that profound experience of being so deeply connected to everything. It doesn't mean you stay there. We come out of that and we say nasty things about people. Or we think people are crazy, or we, cheat somebody out of something. I mean, we can just go on and on. But to get that mercy is of the heart, it's not of the head. So it doesn't mean anything logical. Mercy actually does mean and come from empathy, and I think that's the best word to say it. So, and this knowing that the more deeply centered in God we are, again, what Christ is saying in one word, blessed are those who are merciful, means deeply centered in God. Then we know that we're one with everything. We also move ourselves into that place that Larry alluded to before, which is the only way that God can give to us, which is the only way that we can truly experience God's love, is when we know that we are a part of all that is. That's why Swamiji has us saying that every week, week in and week out. Every word of the festival is meaningful. Every word. Is Asha doing the festival again in the next calendar? Do you know?
She said that was going to be the next course after conversation.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's funny because I wanted to give a class on it, and then Lakshmi told me she's going to do it. Because I don't know if everybody gets how meaningful it is, and there's not a wasted word in it. So, anyway, I forget even what phrase in the festival just now. What was it that I was referring to?
We were part of all.
We are a part of all that is. Yeah, and we say it twice actually, because when the light bearer comes back up at the end and says, as you approach, offer a prayer of gratitude to the infinite Christ, who through our line of gurus, blah, blah, blah. Not blah, blah, blah. I should never say that about them. Terrible. We'll have to edit that out. Pray to. Pray to. Means if I don't say it all, I don't remember it. Pray to, for the grace to share with all as you have received, for you are a part of all that is. It says it in the festival. It says it again. What does that mean? Why is Swamiji saying it over and over? We'll know that. And hopefully everybody's been blessed with moments of knowing it. The closer we can get to living there, the closer we can get to God. Swamiji made an interesting point here. He says about this point of being merciful, he says, when you are living in the light, the more you live there, the more you see God, know God, practice the presence of God. He said, when you see others who are in darkness, he said, you long to bring them to the light. He's using this to describe what does it mean to be merciful. You long to bring them to the light. I just love that phrase that he used. Okay, just one other thing about it. When we're talking about this, remember, Pray for the grace to share with all as you have received, for you are a part of all that is. When we're sharing this light, we have to hold as much as we can in our consciousness that the light is coming through us. It's not our light. If we feel that way, we'll run out of steam soon. We'll get tired. We'll just not be able to sustain it. But when we remember that we are a channel through which that light can flow, being merciful, empathic, loving, finding God in everyone and everything, then we're sustained by it. That's why Master, I think it was who said, not sure now if it's Master or Swamiji, the vehicle is blessed by that which flows through it. Whoever said it, doesn't matter, it's the truth. When we remember that we are a channel, sharing with all as we have received, then it is exactly what is sustaining us. It's exactly, literally, what is keeping us alive. Okay? Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they will see God. Jesus himself said, this is the core of faith, being pure in heart. And what is faith? It's being in the heart and knowing for sure what truth is, knowing God. It's different than believing in God. Purity here really means singleness, unity. It means not that which is taking the heart elsewhere, the desires, our restlessness, our emotions. It's not that. It's the purity of heart that is about unity. It's the knowing, pure in heart means knowing that we are not divided, that there's no good, bad, right, wrong. That doesn't exist. There's one thing, and that one thing is God. And this is why Jesus said, if thine eye be single, we'd know God. But the implication here too is that if the heart is single, all else follows. When you have the energy and your heart is given to God, you know, it's such an important chakra for us. I always say about every chakra that it's important, and every chakra is. But really, part of why these things are harder to talk about and easier to meditate on is because we're getting formless here. We're leaving form. We're leaving matter. We're moving more. We've already put everything that was matter through the fire in the third chakra. It's lost its form, and that is now air in the heart. It can still be contained, compressed. You know, we can do that with air. But if you let it go, it expands. And really, in a way, it will expand infinitely. So it's a whole other ball game here in the heart. The heart is where we can truly know the divine. It takes a lot of effort and energy. You know, there's a woman who's part of our church who is a deeply, deeply devoted, highly evolved soul. I just know it every time I'm with her. And I love her. I mean, I love God in her is what it feels like. And she's very emotional. I'm never, ever with her that she doesn't cry, ever. Not even about being sad or anything. And I said to her one day, I said, you know, you are such a magnificent soul. I just feel such a purity there. It's always hard to put that in words, and every soul's pure, and so it doesn't make any sense, but at a feeling level, I just feel like she could slip out in any moment. But I said to her, do you know that you're very emotional? Yes, Mom, I know. I said, do you know that's holding you here? Yes, Mom. It's an interesting thing. And I know that she could be with God way before I am. But it's just an interesting thing. It's so much a part of the human condition to be emotional. And emotional means we're out. And it means exactly the opposite of being in and with God. This is why purity of heart is so essential. Non-duality.
You alluded to it earlier, our heart is made for thee alone.
That's right, and it will not know peace until it finds thee
We'll
again.
find our rest until we find our rest in thee.
Was it St. Anthony?
I think so.
Yeah. Our heart was made for thee alone. That was the first line that I couldn't get, but it's the truth though. I mean, it was St. Anthony.
Yeah.
Living in the desert for all those years, he was a saint speaking those words. But again, they're just words, not like our heart is made for thee. It's like our heart will only be true when it's one with thee again. To know that.
It follows the heart, always, even on the most basic human level. I mean, when we love something, that's where our thoughts are, that's where our actions go to, everything goes there.
That's right. That's exactly right. So let's make sure that we're loving and are trying to do all the right things. This beatitude that we're talking about is really the absolute fulfillment, the sort of making it, if you will, of non-attachment, purity of heart. And it's so beautiful. I mean, that the gift, as Jesus says it, that you will see God. So he says it really loud and clear. Just do this. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Even the order of these sometimes is interesting, isn't it? It's sort of an interesting thing to me, but the order that he did. But in a way, I could see how this could follow all Lakshmi shaking her head, yes. Just really getting it, because you cannot speak about peace otherwise until I think that's not true. It's like the yamas and niyamas. You don't fully satisfy one before you can work on the next one. Of course not. We would never, it would take many, many, many more millions of lives before we would get where we were going. And yet you can just feel how the inspiration was coming to Jesus is really probably the better way of saying that. When the heart is gentled, made, and he called me, when it's singled, when it's unified, when the ego's been tamed, when you know that there's no good, no bad, there's no winning team, there's no losing team. I mean, we're talking about peace. There can't be war. There's no war within, and there would be no war without. Remember, that is the end point of all of the yamas and niyamas. Patanjali shows us what happens if you perfect this, if you perfect nonviolence like Master has. You just have a lion rolling over on its back and letting you rub its tummy. There can't be violence if you hold that space. So he's saying this, and he's saying your inner being will come to such rest and will flow into the world, bringing, really in our words, peace and harmony. And that's true. I mean, at a much lesser level. Again, you've all heard me tell this story when I had, the first time I ever called something spiritual epiphany is when I had that realization about my husband, Barry. And I said, I'll never fight with him again. I'll never fight with him again. I'll never see anything wrong. This is what was being fed to me. You can't have a fight if you're only one person. There's no fight. A fight implies two of you. A war implies both of you. Never mind the fact that when one, I don't forget the story I just told because I am who I am, it was a great blessing that came to me. I'm not implying that I've completely gotten rid of all violence within myself. I have not. But when one attains that for moments or hours or situation after situation, because it was a spiritual epiphany and we see and we go, no, here, like that. That's the energy that we're putting out into the world. The fight in the world is lost. There's no disharmony. There's nothing to engage with other than the pure, uplifted energy of the soul, of the divine. You see, it's pure peace. It has to be, by its very definition, when all of these conditions have been met. All of the conditions that came before. Because that means that those devotees are living in the consciousness of God that's changeless, that inner peace. So they become peacemakers. They become not peacemakers, human peacemakers. You become pure manifestations of peace, one of the 8 attributes of the divine. Not that you want to feel peaceful, we do, but that we are peace. That's what this is saying. And we become a peacemaker because that is now the energy that was this being that's now in the world. It's the energy of peace. It's not an outward effort. Does that make sense? Even as we talk about the chakras, in a way, we're talking about a progression of subtlety. At least here, I feel it. I mean, getting rid of ego, which is number 1, is pretty subtle. But you can see how this is. This beatitude, to me, includes all of the previous beatitudes. And it says, when you do this, you're at peace. When you do that, when you do that, when you do that. When you forget delusion, and it just goes on and on. You become peace. Then you are a peacemaker. The battle is inside. It's not an outward battle. The lack of peace is inside. Anybody have any comments? Okay, we're in our last beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. We already defined righteousness as one with God, so we have to hold that here. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That is so beautiful. I want to see, I didn't put it here. Swamiji talks very often, I wrote it somewhere else, but it doesn't matter, I know it. I know it. Is that when, and he's talking about for righteousness' sake, so just even bringing it down a level. Whenever you're in the position in the world of really, in a meaningful way, doing good deeds, trying to do good deeds, it draws Satan. It draws the attention of darkness. And it demands that and it happens to everyone. At simple levels, I just want to try and make it real. I remember when I became a vegetarian, I was in my late 20s, and it just happened just like that. And but I knew I had to be a vegetarian. And I can't tell you how hard it was for everybody in my world. Everybody, my whole family, all of my friends, how many discussions people had, those wanting to talk me out of it, And I was in my 20s and the 60s. It was still the days of a lot of marijuana around some very bright people. If you've ever been around anybody who smokes marijuana, they talk a lot and they think they're brilliant all the time. And I would have to listen to my friends going on and on. It was a big deal. People do not like you. I mean, it's very interesting. My cousin was just here visiting me, and he and his wife eat very, very well. And they don't like my diet anymore because I'll eat some ice cream, or, I eat, which happens to actually be better for you, but I couldn't convince them of that, whole fat yogurts or whatever it is. I don't eat a bad diet, but and they would never touch a French fry, never. I would. I don't eat them that often, but I would say 6 times a year I eat a couple of French fries. I'm not like, he used to make such fun of me when I was 30 years old about my diet. I was a vegetarian. I would not eat even a grain of refined food. Nothing. I ate nothing but whole food. I had a really good diet then, and I did it for about 25 years before I started lightening up a little bit. Now they don't eat like that. But I said to him, isn't this interesting? Remember how upset you were with me for having a very good diet? Look at how critical you are of me now. I taught you everything you know, I told him. It's just so interesting. People want to argue with you wherever you are or what's ever happening. Never mind if you decide to step onto this path. How much angst has it caused for how many people, because their families don't want them to be on a spiritual path. Now, why in the world am I talking about all this?
Because you get persecuted.
Because you get persecuted, thank you. And it's just so right. Every time we try and do something good or step further into the light, there will be people, even people you wouldn't expect it from, who will want to get you. Look at what's happened in Swami's life. Look at what happened to Jesus. He was a manifestation of pure light. Every time I think about it, I could be ill. They crucified him. We use that word so much, we forget what it means. But they crucified him. It's just so horrible. Look at all the things that happened to Master. People taking him to court, suing him. Really, things that were said about him and shared about him, and the lies that were told, it just goes on and on. And all of what's happened to Ananda, it's just always true. And Jesus is saying, when you're doing this for the right reason, don't be deterred. You have now found yourself in God. I wanted to read this thing that I found yesterday from St. Thomas. St. Thomas wrote, "Blessed are you in the midst of persecution, who when they hate and pursue you, even to the core of your being, cannot find you anywhere." Isn't that beautiful? I'm just going to repeat it. Blessed are you in the midst of persecution, who, when they hate and pursue you, even to the core of your being, cannot find you anywhere. That was just so beautiful. It reminded me immediately, of course, of the story of that saint who went out for the day and who was walking through the village, and there were kids there and they tried to get his attention, but he was in samadhi and he was just walking, and so one of them picked up a stone and threw it, and still he didn't notice, and so these kids started throwing stones and sticks at him and everything, and when he got back to his ashram, he was bloodied and bruised, and his disciple said, "Master, what happened to you?" And he said, he looked at his body like he was seeing it for the first time. He goes, "Oh, this." He said, "Oh, I went to the village and the kids were playing, and they were playing with all these stones and just having such a good time." And that's what it was for him. That's what it was for him. When we quit referring everything back to I, to me, everything, even when we sit and say, "Wow, I'm doing pretty well." No, you're not. No. You cannot find you anywhere. Then yours is the kingdom of heaven. This is what our journey is all about. Really, Christ is speaking the truth here. The way Master spoke the truth, it's all Sanatan Dharma. Doesn't matter what name we give it. It's right where we started. I'll just read to you if I can put my hands on it. Yeah, I pulled it out, good. I just want to say to you, in our language, really, this is from Swamiji, the writing that he did, and I think this is in Rays of the Same Light, but he listed these 8 points to hold about the Beatitudes. Number 1, renounce ego. Number 2, yearn for the Lord from the depths of your soul. Number 3, attune yourself to divine truth. Number 4, live always by the highest principles. Spurn any fascination of delusion. Isn't that amazing? Fascination of delusion, because that's how it happens. Expand your heart's feelings to include the well-being of all. We were talking about seeing God in everything. Remain inwardly unaffected by the storms of life. Seek always with inner calmness to bring divine peace on earth. And last, in the face of death itself, stand courageously by your eternal commitment to God alone. Really beautiful little summary of what these Beatitudes are. These Beatitudes, and I think now that we've spoken of them like this, and not, spiritual path is very interesting. When I was down in, I'm going to tell you why with this little story. In Los Angeles, I met a woman, I was down there a few weeks ago. Lakshmi and I went, we gave really 4 programs, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Somebody came up to me at the end of the program on Thursday night, and she's somebody who I know is very sincere in her spiritual search. This was in one of the communities that, LA has 3 different communities. And she was crying, and she said to me, I'm just stuck with some things. And she said, and I know it, and I see them, and I can't get out of it. And I didn't say anything out loud yet, but I wanted to say, yeah, welcome to the human condition, but I didn't. She was so sincere and such a beautiful soul. And then she said to me, Shanti, I trust that you can hear this in the right way. She said, I listen to every Sunday service, to every talk. And she said, not only here, she said, literally, I listen to every class you've given, every sermon, Asha, Jyotish and Devi. She went on and on, read it all. She said, I often think I'm never hearing anything new. She said that to me. And I said, you're not. The spiritual path is simple. She said, I've never said that to anybody because I thought they would think I'm arrogant. And she is so, I said to her, you were quintessentially the opposite of arrogance. But you're right, truth is simple. It is very simple. What everybody does, all of us, everybody who teaches or shares conversations or anything is, we just try and bring stories to it or put words to it or hold it up in a way that it's more accessible to our soul's knowing, to our behavior, to our energy. It's like we hear it, we repeat it because putting ourselves in the midst of it makes it ever more a part of who we really are, who we live, how we live. That's why we do it. So I didn't think today, oh, I'll come and I'll say something new. I didn't say anything new. But, you share ideas, inspirations come. Anybody who speaks, put it out. It's a little different. And first of all, we had the intention today of spending 3 hours together doing this. I knew this yesterday, so I spent a lot of yesterday reading about, meditating on, asking Master for guidance. What better way to spend a day? I knew this would be the last day of my seclusion, and I was so thrilled with it. I felt so given to. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying, no, none of it's new. But I think now we can hold these Beatitudes in a way that can help guide us just in moments. It'll come to us. And we'll use these words differently. And we'll think about it as mercy, as peace. Righteousness will sound different. You know, it's so weird. I'm talking about these Beatitudes and thinking about nothing else for a day. And I'm searching for them in my mind. And I'm saying, what were all those words again? And part of it is, they're not words that we use. So they're not, I could talk about them again, but without finding exactly the words I'm finding. It's so interesting. But hunger and thirst, and I mean, just all of those words that we now know, oh, that's what it means. It means with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, that we are committed to all of these virtues on this path.
And it might not be new information, but it's time spent focusing on what really matters.
Yeah, we committed ourselves to these 3 hours. It always amazes me. I always say, wow, let's just, and you know, many people will watch this. It's not that people who aren't here don't care, but I always think it means a great deal to say, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to that class and I'm going to be part of this discussion. I agree. I'm partly repeating what you're saying, Larry, to make sure it gets on here. But
and it's about attunement.
It's about attunement. Just even the being here is, but the whole lesson, it's all about attunement. It's the essence of our whole path. Attune, attune, attune. You know, that's why Jesus would speak in parables, and Master around his disciples, as we all know, didn't speak much at all. All of the avatars want us to feel their presence more than putting it in our mind, because I wasn't quite joking before when I said we spend a lot of time in classes teaching, learning, receiving, wherever role we're playing in the moment, doesn't matter, all with our minds, when the words we're talking about we're saying them because we want to get beyond mind. And yet, you know, so we have to open our hearts and feel the essence of what we're talking about, more than just hearing the words. And that's another reason why doing it again and again and again really matters, because it's touching our hearts. Never mind that the teachings are the same and not all that complicated, but each time goes a little further in our spine, removes maybe, I always think of those kernels of rice that we throw into the fire. They're tiny. One little vritti can just throw us off for lifetimes. So when we sit in this energy, that even if we walk out and we don't really remember any of the words, or it's not really a class on what this means, it's about being together, saying, wow, Jesus was saying this 2019 years ago, and you know, or 2018, I don't know exactly what point in his life the sermon came, but you know, just let one more little vritti be free, that much closer, because we were here today. It'll be more than worth it. What a gift, huh? Anybody else, anything to say or ask or add to this?
Thank you, Shanti. It was a beautiful class.
Well, thank you all.